We live in the most highly stimulated era in human history, yet we are surrounded by an epidemic of exhaustion and apathy. This disconnect comes down to the way we track pleasure. The popular concept of the dopamine hit is a biological lie. This chart illustrates how dopamine operates. First is a flat, continuous baseline, then a sharp spike when you encounter a rewarding stimulus. But the brain enforces a brutal rule. After that peak, the line plunges downward, creating a trough proportional to the peak. This trough represents a drop in your actual dopamine baseline. Because of the reward you just consumed, your ambient level of motivation, drive, and energy is now lower than it was before you started chasing the reward in the first place. Biologically, getting exactly what you want ensures you will feel worse afterward. To understand why this happens, we have to look at dopamine as a finite physical resource. It is manufactured and stored inside tiny cellular pockets called synaptic vesicles. This diagram shows the readily releasable pool. When you engage in a highly stimulating activity, these vesicles are emptied out. Your brain physically cannot release dopamine that it hasn't had the time to synthesize yet. The storage pool is empty. Stanford psychiatrist Dr. Anna Lembke identifies this dynamic as the pleasure-pain balance. Whenever we tip the brain scale heavily toward pleasure, the brain reflexively tips it back toward pain to restore equilibrium. When you experience a craving for something, a notification, sugar, or a drug, you are not feeling a surplus of desire. You are feeling the neurological pain of a localized dopamine deficit demanding to be filled. What modern culture celebrates as desire is actually a state of biological pain, demanding to be medicated by an ever-shrinking physical resource. As we chase larger and larger artificial peaks, we trigger a process called the progressive narrowing of pleasure. The baseline drops so low that ordinary wins, like maintaining a relationship or putting in a hard day of work, no longer register as rewards at all. We can quantify the exact chemical cost of this. Take a daily stimulant like nicotine. Smoking it spikes dopamine to 2.5 times above your resting baseline. This chart plots multipliers for everyday human rewards. Chocolate pushes dopamine to 1.5 times baseline. Enjoyable exercise pushes it to 2.0. Contrast these natural limits with the massive 10 times spike from illicit amphetamines. Natural behaviors vanish by comparison. Exposing the brain to these unnatural multipliers systematically destroys its capability to experience joy in a baseline reality. You don't need drugs to trigger this effect. We do it to ourselves through dopamine layering. We bundle a pre-workout drink, layer on aggressive music, and scroll social media, all just to optimize a single trip to the gym. This bundling forces an artificial volumetric release of dopamine across the brain. Eventually, you raise the biological requirement just to feel normal, and the core activity, the actual workout, loses its appeal. The consequences of this overstimulation go far beyond boredom. In 2003, researchers Kolb and his team published a stark warning regarding pharmacological stimulants like Adderall, Ritalin, and cocaine. They found that the massive peak and subsequent severe crash caused by these chemicals physically blocks the neocortex's ability to structurally adapt and form new connections. They temporarily paralyze your neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to learn. Relying on chemical cocktails to force motivation borrows energy from your future and physically prevents the neural remodeling required to learn. There is, however, a biological loophole. Protocols like cold water immersion trigger a massive 2.5 times spike in dopamine. That rivals the output of cocaine, entirely without the use of pharmacology. This line chart compares a chemical stimulant to a cold immersion response. Because the dopamine from the cold is triggered by acute physical friction, it creates a gradual rise that plateaus, sustaining elevated focus and mood for hours, avoiding the devastating crash. We can also repair the baseline through purposeful sensory deprivation. Practices like fasting or deliberate digital abstinence physically upregulate the brain's dopamine receptors, making them sensitive to whatever dopamine is left in the system. Removing constant artificial stimuli and exposing the body to acute physical friction repairs the broken baseline, making the mind sensitive to the pleasure of simple existence. To break the layering habit, you can implement a protocol called casinos of the mind. Before a work session or a run, flip a coin. Heads, you get music or a coffee. Tails, you perform the activity in total silence with no stimulants at all. By making the reward unpredictable, you introduce an intermittent reinforcement schedule. This randomness prevents your receptors from burning out and preserves your readily releasable pool of dopamine. The most effective shift occurs when you use your prefrontal cortex, the logical center of your brain, to forcefully reassign the chemical reward. You have to stop looking at the trophy, the grade, or the finish line. Instead, you consciously tell yourself that the raw friction, the strain, and the physical pain of the effort itself is the reward. You learn to attach the dopamine release directly to the act of doing the work. When you extract pleasure from the strain itself rather than the trophy at the end, you move past biological depletion into a state of consistent, self-directed motivation. Dopamine is a dynamic, subjective tracker that evaluates your current life relative to your recent experiences. You are constantly hovering between two states: the inward-facing paralysis of a depleted baseline or the focused, high-performance readiness of an optimized one. Take action by picking exactly one of these protocols to test this week. Randomize your rewards, endure a cold shower, or reframe your moment of friction. Motivation is a biological mechanism you can control. Subscribe to PodEssence for more science-backed protocols to optimize your own biology.